Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptations. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. This will be my Outlander Season 8, Episode 3 review titled A.B.'s Fraser Eye. As always, if you are looking to avoid spoilers from the books or the TV show, please do keep on scrolling. So this episode opens with a shot of insects pinned to a board and plenty of beetles, which is foreshadowing to Amaranthus and the clothing that she had made for Ben and then gifts to William to wear. And the clothing has all of the beetles in North America on it, so we can see many beetles, and then we zoom in on the Hercules dynasty's Tydeus beetle, which she and William talk about in the episode. Then we cut over to see that we're back on the ridge at the trading post and find Fanny and Brianna together there. Fanny is looking at a pretty comb, and Bree asks her if she would like to have it, but Bree is approaching this from a place that Fanny doesn't understand. She, like her sister Jane, isn't able to comprehend what it's like to own things or even have the ability to buy things. So even though Bree is giving her this very kind gesture and offering to purchase it for her, we remember in last season Jane explaining to William that she has no concept of coin or money. The same can be applied to Fanny here. Bree is then alerted that her post has arrived, and so she leaves Fanny by the table to think about whether or not she wants the comb to go get her news and mail. And that is when Fanny is approached by two men who start to insinuate that they can tell what Fanny is and that she grew up in a brothel and is from a brothel, but we see her be very firm with them. And they start to press, but she calls the man a toad-faced footlicker, and he's obviously offended. And we see them get into this disagreement and Brianna returning to Fanny in the background. And instantly we can tell that Fanny is upset, but she tries to downplay the fact that the men had bothered her. This scene allows us to set eyes on these two men because they will be a visual callback and a narrative callback later on in this episode. And it also makes it clear to us as viewers that Brianna also recognizes these men and then sees them interacting with Cunningham as well, because that information eventually makes its way to Jamie. Fanny doesn't want Brianna to get involved or to confront the men because she wants to address it directly. So instead, the two of them leave, and again, it helps us to piece together that Cunningham is up to something, and Bree is now a witness of it as well as Fanny. Back at the ridge, Claire is writing in a book when we see Jamie approach her with a letter that we learn is from Lord John Grey. And instantly we as viewers can tell that he is upset by this and asks Claire what John could possibly want of her. And Claire clarifies that he is in Savannah with William and he actually wants Brianna. He's asked Brianna to come and commission a portrait of Amaranthus and Trevor, which is different from how it plays out in the books. He actually asks her to come to paint a portrait of an altogether different person named Alfred Brumby and his new wife in the book. And when Claire says she will go and ask Bree if she'd like to go to Savannah, Jamie says, "No, you won't," which kickstarts their argument. And again, as a detail from the book, we're actually in John's point of view as he writes the letter to Jamie himself, asking if Brianna would come to Savannah to paint the portrait of Alfred Brumby's new wife, and he consults his brother Hal about it. And in that conversation, he actually admits to Hal that Bree is William's half-sister, and they had met briefly years ago. It's actually under his brother Hal's advice that he mentions William in the letter to Jamie because Hal recognizes that Jamie will send her if he knows that William is there. All of these men know what it's like to be a father, and Hal is confident in Jamie's care for William being just as strong as John's care for William as well. In the book, it's actually dialogue pulled from chapter 35 when Claire and Jamie have this exchange and Jamie says, "No, you're not." Claire's actually telling Jamie she's going to write to Lord John. And he says, no, you're not. So it's a little different in the show version. And that takes place after they receive a letter learning that Denzel Hunter has been captured and is being held prisoner. And in the book, Denzel is married to John's niece, Dottie. So Claire wonders if she's going to be able to get any more information about Denzel through John's knowledge of where Dottie might be. And so Claire turns and asks if Jamie is seriously saying no to her and if he'd care to rephrase that, because she's clearly not going to listen. So the show has clearly woven in dialogue and story beats from other more minor subplots in favor of this being an argument around Lord John to sort of condense that timeline and storyline. Claire asks if he's seriously not going to allow her to go and talk to Bree, and reminds Jamie that this doesn't involve him, but Jamie has clearly not been able to come to terms with her marrying and sleeping with Lord John. So it all bubbles over in this really great scene between them, which calls back to their fight when Jamie returned back in season 7. Jamie doesn't mean to be involved with Lord John Grey at all, but he is forced to be because of what happened between him and Claire. And so when Claire starts to defend herself by saying that Jamie already knows what happened, he counters by explaining that in more crass terms, he can't get over the fact that Lord John took her in the way that he did. And we can see from a little shot around the corner that Fanny is listening to this conversation in the other room. When Claire asks Jamie, I thought we were done with that, Jamie delivers this great line from the source material where he says, "Did I not tell you once, I'm a jealous man? I begrudged every hour you spent in another man's bed. I meant it. I still mean it. And you'll do what you damn please. God knows you always do. But don't pretend that I don't know what I feel about it." As Jamie leaves, Claire points out that he's unable to avoid John forever because so long as he's tied to William, Jamie will be tied to him too. And that's when Jamie yells out, "Damn William," and Fanny overhears that. When Fanny asks what William has done to upset Mr. Fraser, Claire insists that it doesn't have anything to do with William, but Fanny makes it clear she heard the entire conversation when she says she understood what Jamie had said. And we get this great shot of Claire reacting to those words. I really enjoyed how organic this all felt. And Fanny makes it clear that she's worried that this means that Jamie and Claire will have to bring her back to the brothel, because so long as Jamie is mad at William, he won't do what William asked, which is take care of her. Claire makes a point to correct her and insists that she'll never have to go back there because Jamie and Claire want her. And even though Jamie and William are the same, that means neither of them will do anything against their will. And Jamie promised to keep Fanny safe, and he keeps his word, and so does Claire. This felt like a nice return to the main plot of the book, where Fanny potentially being Jamie and Claire's granddaughter isn't a part of the impetus behind their closeness towards her. And in the book, Claire also explains how Jamie had to let Lord John take care of William because he had gone to prison, and how John had raised William as his son because neither of them thought Jamie would ever be released, and John didn't think that he would ever have children of his own. That moment in the book is also when Claire tells Fanny that she had fought in the war too and had seen very bad things, and that dialogue was actually used in episode 2, so we see that it got moved around and repurposed in the show. Back in Savannah, we see William at Lord John's home, which in the book is number 12 Oglethorpe Street in Savannah. And he tells John that Ben is not dead because his body was not in his grave. And once again, we see that Lord John Grey is choosing to be far more pragmatic. And in the book, this conversation happens quite early on in the story. And William is actually telling Dennis Randall Isaacs, who is the son of Mary Hawkins and Alexander Randall, Blackjack Randall's brother, about finding Ben's grave with another man in it. Dennis first appears with William in Quebec in An Echo in the Bone, and then again in Philadelphia in Written in My Own Heart's Blood. And in the book version of this scene, William recalls thinking that he was once a friend before Dennis had left him in Quebec. And at this point in the story, William had been chased by a group of rebels after he had won a card game the night before, and they'd beaten him to a pulp, taken back their money, and then they were all collectively captured by the Redcoats, which is when William announced his title, and Dennis confirmed that William was, in fact, who he said he was. And in that correspondence, it's revealed that Dennis is also looking for Captain Richardson and tells William that he has turned his coat and has been making threats towards Lord John, which is a subplot that I do suspect we will see in this season. But in the show, this conversation is used to map out what the storyline will be for William's search for Ben and establishes that John does not subscribe to the idea that Ben could be alive at this point. John is unable to make great reaches like William is and suspects that William is simply looking for a sense of purpose here. So despite the fact that John is unwilling to subscribe to the notion that Ben is alive, he decides to meet William halfway and explains that if Ben were to have escaped from the camp, he would have given word to his commanding officer, and that officer is currently in Savannah. John, as it happens, will be dining with General Prevost at his luncheon and could introduce William to that officer, and he'd be able to make inquiries. But it's a double-edged sword because William can tell that John is also trying to get him back into society. In the book, Dennis is actually the one who writes to John and asks him to bring William specifically to the luncheon. So again, they've rearranged that story quite a bit, and I am curious if they're going to include Dennis Randall Isaacs in this final season of the show. He's not a super important character, but it is kind of a fun Easter egg that he is the grown son of Mary Hawkins that we saw way back in season 2. Back at the Ridge, Claire and Bree are in the kitchen discussing John's invitation to Savannah to paint this portrait, and we get this humorous moment between Claire and Brianna when they are discussing Lord John. Brianna doesn't understand why Jamie and Lord John are in a disagreement at the time, and Claire has to explain to her that she had married Lord John and why she had to marry him and everything that happened around those circumstances. But to Brianna, it seems like something that Jamie wouldn't be upset about given that John was protecting Claire. And that's when Claire gives it up and admits that they had slept together because they were drowning in grief and alcohol. Brianna is naturally shocked by this information, but she chooses to make a joke about it and how she might have to call John Da now. And Claire and her are, having a humorous moment, but she makes it clear not to joke about that in front of Jamie. Then back at the trading post, we see Cunningham at Crombie's, and Jamie ends up confronting him about the 2 officers that we saw at the top of the episode. Cunningham claims that they are his son's comrades and they had brought back some of his son's belongings to him, but Jamie can very clearly tell that he is lying and that something else is going on here. This is the first time that we see Jamie looking at this weapon, and again, this is foreshadowing visually and narratively to the end of this episode because he can tell that there's something odd about this particular weapon, and he makes it clear to Cunningham that he will not tolerate any actions that would threaten the Ridge or its settlers. Jamie, for all his faults, gives people the benefit of the doubt for a lot longer than I think sometimes he should. And in this situation, I think he has more faith in people, specifically Cunningham, than maybe is advisable. He gives warnings, but he hasn't chosen to intervene yet. And he tells Cunningham that the men upset Fanny. And that is his way of pointing out that it's starting to affect other people in his personal life, and he's taking notice. I really love the actor who plays Cunningham because he has this really beautiful delivery of these lines where you can tell it's so insincere. And he says to Jamie that he'll tell them that behavior is, unacceptable should he see them again. And that's when you can tell he's ushering Jamie out and promptly ending any more of Jamie's prying. And it's a really well executed scene because with the acting, the facial expressions, the pauses, all of those details, you can tell that something is afoot, especially when Cunningham closes the door and pauses here for a moment and is contemplating his next move on this chessboard between him and Jamie. Back in Savannah, we see William changing when Amaranthus enters the room. And I think this is so funny because it's such a visual callback to Jamie when we saw him with his shirt off and his long hair not tied back, or even in Blood of My Blood when we saw his father in the same state without his shirt on. It's really trying to bridge the gap between William and the rest of the Frasers and how he is indeed a Fraser. And that's when we see Amaranthus enter the room with the waistcoat that she had embroidered for Ben, and she notes that William looks to be of similar size. This is when she explains that all of the beetles on the waistcoat can be found in the colonies and they are all anatomically correct. So again, this is a visual callback to the opening of the episode when we got the title card, and we can see an up-close shot of this beautiful embroidery detail. The costume department of this show is one of the best on television, and I think that this is really another beautiful example, similar to Claire's wedding dress, where we get to see that shine. In the book, William actually wakes up to the waistcoat in his room along with a suit from Lord John. So the show is using this scene to establish the attraction between William and Amaranthus. And in the books, John makes a point to refer to Amaranthus as William's cousin quite often, but William is very attuned to Amaranthus and her advances on him. They do that with her gliding her hands over his shoulders and looming in his room longer than she should without a chaperone. So the show is keeping it very simple and straightforward here so that we can't ignore the fact that they're queuing that up for us. In the book, Lord John is actually a witness to it a number of times. So I do wonder if we're going to get him setting eyes on the two of them interacting and picking up on this attraction between them like he does in the story. When William asks her why beetles, Amaranthus explains her background to him and how her father is not noble. He's actually a naturalist and a bookseller, and her grandfather was a botanist. She also explains that that's where her name Amaranthus comes from, which means pigweed. And this conversation was taken from an earlier one in the book between William and Amaranthus, and it's sort of intermingled with the conversation they had in the last episode when they were outside together. So they moved it here to help imply that the two of them are growing closer and have that sort of commonality between them of not having family that is truly nobility, which will come up later in the episode when William admits to Amaranthus that he is a bastard. And again, the show doubles down on making it clear that there's an attraction between them because William saying it's a beautiful name is a show addition. Back at the Ridge, Bree and Roger are pitching the idea to Jamie that they go to Savannah with the secondary mission of getting weapons. And Bree, knowing that she has a letter of safe passage from Lord John, is thinking of using the Frenchman's gold to pay for those weapons. This is all coming in light of the news of the battle coming to the mountains that they had all read in Frank's book. And in the book, Jamie worries that using the gold in any capacity might tip people off, and he knows that gold is worth something everywhere. So once people know that you have it, they all want it. In the book, Jamie hasn't touched the gold himself because he doesn't feel it's truly his, but also because he doesn't want to use it directly. So he often shaves it down, turns it into nuggets, rubs dirt on them, and then passes them through multiple men that he trusts in different places and never in the same place twice. And so it slowly gets turned into cash bit by bit. And so Jamie is immediately dismissive of that idea in the show, and we do get a little tiny hint of that musket ball making later on in the episode between Roger and Fergus. But ultimately, Jamie shoots the idea down, and he's dismissive of it. And that's when Claire decides to go and speak with him directly, because she doesn't want Jamie to punish Bree or Roger simply because he is still angry about John. And this is when we get a really big confrontation between Jamie and Claire, and a pretty faithful adaptation from the book where this scene takes place in chapter 37, and we follow it quite closely throughout this scene. The main difference is that this conversation takes place outside in the book while they're walking, and in the show, they're obviously in their room. But the dialogue is basically one for one, and I really love being able to see it all play out on screen so closely to how I envisioned the cadence and the line delivery while reading the story. And not only is it a beautiful moment of prose in the book, but it also offers a lot of humorous moments between the two of them as well. And also a lot of visual callbacks to earlier seasons between Jamie and Claire, especially this one where we see him untying her laces like he did during their wedding. And the show even goes so far as to have the exact same camera blocking for this shot to make sure that that visual parallel is obvious to us. Their interactions throughout this scene remind me very much of when they were younger and they had this sort of naivete about their relationship dynamic, and neither of them really knew what they were doing. And it feels akin to that in a very satisfying way as a show watcher and a book reader, especially because we can tell that even after all of this time, Jamie is still a jealous, jealous man when it comes to Claire, and his love for her will always rear its ugly head in these ways. But it's also a really tender moment between the two of them, and I thought it was a highlight of the episode for Sam in particular and his acting choices. What I particularly love about this scene between Jamie and Claire is that it takes them a while to get to the root of the argument itself. And a lot of that is because Jamie is guarding the truth very closely, and he doesn't want to admit it to Claire for a number of reasons. And so even though it often presents itself as though Jamie is angry at Claire herself, he's often angry at the situation and how irrational he feels with his reactions being so strong. And that's been consistent throughout the course of their relationship. And I really love how many visual callbacks we get with the camera blocking in this scene, having the two of them sitting this way on the bed, and then there are other visual callbacks littered throughout the conversation between the two of them. But this fight feels very much like one of the fights that they would have had in season 1 or season 2. And that is a testament to both Katrina Balfe and Sam Heughan's acting and how they can both fall back into that cadence that they had even when they were young, because the actors and the characters have grown older. And so much of the way that their intimate scenes are shot and acted out are different, both for the characters and for the actors. Ultimately, for me, the highlight of this entire scene is Sam's acting here, because he conveys so effortlessly both the longing and the upset that he has in his heart over the situation, and how scared he is that what he's worried about might manifest and actually come true, which is that John will come between Claire and him in their marriage bed. And even though Claire feels that that's an impossibility, it's something that she's able to recognize as a very real fear instilled very deeply in Jamie. This intimacy scene is used in a number of ways. First of all, there's a lot of visual callbacks to earlier scenes in the show. We get a lot of camera blocking that represents that. But we also can tell that in addition to the use of an intimacy coordinator on set, their sex life would have changed as they aged. And these scenes are shot as a way to reflect that. And I really love the camera work for the moment between the two of them here, because it reminded me of a scene in season 4 when they first came to America. So again, the camera blocking is used very effectively here to draw a lot of parallels to when they were younger and show us that even though the nature of how these scenes are shot on screen for us, they have maintained the level of intimacy throughout the course of their relationship. And it's the way that they still come back to one another when there's a disconnect in their relationship. I really loved the camera work for the moment after, when Claire asks if they've gotten that out of their system now. And Jamie's face here is just so tender and open. We get the line from the book of Claire asking, "Did I break the skin?" And Jamie saying, "You do that every time you touch me, Sassenach." One part that's been omitted from the book is that Jamie actually speaks in Irish Gaelic and delivers the line, "My body is out of my control. She was the half of my body, the very half of my soul." The next day, we see Jamie and Claire out on the porch, and he finds Claire out there holding Frank's book, and he has this funny line about going to bed fighting about her third husband, waking to find her reading a book written by her first. The two of them start to think through Frank's book and what his motive might have been for writing it, and they both know that Frank had no reason to love Jamie. If anything, he'd hate him forever for taking Claire from him. Then we get this great narrative callback to when Claire told Black Jack Randall the day of his death and how she used that to torture him, and wonders if perhaps Frank is doing the same with his book. And I loved the line that Jamie delivers, that no one can be tortured with the truth as well as a lie. Claire then expresses that she can no longer tell what's real anymore, and that's what's worrying her. And we can tell that Jamie is feeling the same way about this situation. He's been mulling over this book for many chapters by this point in the story, and we've seen him talking to other people on the ridge in the show about it, so you can tell it's weighing heavily on both of their minds. That's when Claire leaves and Jamie picks the book back up, and we can hear Frank's voice again saying, "You know it's real. In your heart, you know what's written is the truth." This shot of Jamie looking out over his land and hearing that voice in his head was used in the trailer, and I had a feeling that he was thinking very heavily about the future and what to do about it when I saw the trailer originally. And I think the use of Frank's voice is a great way to convey his own thoughts, even though it sounds like it's, Frank literally saying those words to Jamie. It's meant to be reflection of Jamie's thoughts and feelings about the subject matter. It's just manifesting in Frank's voice. At the luncheon, we can see William approaching a man named General Leslie, and he starts to ask after Benjamin. William makes it clear that he finds it very hard to believe that Benjamin would have perished at the camp that he visited. And Leslie informs him that the only information he received was one letter after they were captured, and he has not heard anything more about them since. To William, that feels like a dead end, and then Leslie asks if William would be able to speak to what he saw at this camp, and William agrees. He's asking because he's trying to figure out what the conditions of are the prisoners at these camps, and then General Leslie refers to Lord John and references speaking to him because Lord John has experience with prisoners. And that's when William realizes and learns that Lord John was at Ardsmuir Prison in Scotland 25 years ago. And so this is yet another piece of the puzzle to William's parentage being slotted into place. The dialogue itself is taken from chapter 44 in the book, and it actually takes place with a man named Preston, not General Leslie. When we cut back to the ridge, we get a scene from the books that I wasn't sure we would see when a young girl approaches Claire asking if she would be willing to help her mother, who is attempting to deliver her baby but having difficulty. In the book, the girl's name is Agnes Cloudtree, and she and her family are Cherokee, whereas the show has changed their name to Whitaker. This takes place in chapter 54 in the book, and much of the scene plays out exactly like the book version of events. Claire telling Susanna that she's having twins, which surprises her, and trying to get her up and moving so that she can move them in the womb. We also get this quick shot of Fanny, who's bringing honey water to Susanna, and again reiterates to us that she's become a quick study and has interest in medicine and helps Claire with a lot of her patients. That's when we cut back to the luncheon and we see William approaching the table to sit down beside John, and instead we see Percy sit down. This look between them, again, is pretty charged, and this conversation is a really effective info dump because Percy reveals that he is looking for a Claudel Fraser who owns a print shop in town, and that he had written him several letters already and is trying to get in touch with him. John is very surprised to see him again and learn all of this information from him that he's offering up so candidly, like the fact that Claudel was born in Paris in a brothel, then taken from the brothel by a tall, red-headed Scotsman named Fraser. Then under the table, we can see that Percy is putting his hand on John's thigh. So again, these two have a very long history between the two of them. If you've never read Lord John's novellas, I highly recommend them. They're fantastic. And Percy is woven deeply into John's story. Percy makes it clear that he wants John to contact Fergus and connect him to Percy. And John says he will consider it, only because he had helped with William last year. But John also needs help finding Captain Richardson, and he knows that Percy is the person to help with that. And so the two of them agree, and they share this look between the two of them. And again, it does a great job conveying that complicated past between the two of them, because John had once loved Percy, but he can admit now that he neither likes nor trusts him. Back at the ridge, we see Aaron Whitaker show up at the big house, and we get a more fleshed out conversation between the two of them than we do in the book. Because in the book, Mr. Cloudtree is outside and he is drunk. And in the show, the Cloudtrees are instead the Whitakers, and they're a free family that do not want to involve themselves with white people because they believe it to be dangerous. Jamie points out to Aaron that his wife needs to let Jamie's wife help her. And so he is resolved to allow it to happen, even though he has such little trust in white men. Jamie insists that no one will ever know that they were at their house, and Aaron agrees. And so Jamie invites him out of the room for a dram of whiskey so that Claire can do her work. And that's when we cut back to Savannah again, where we see William presenting something to Amaranthus, which she is clearly expecting to be a present, but instead finds him presenting her with Ben's uniform and belongings that he recovered on his journey to New Jersey. Her face very quickly falls, so you can tell that something's going on here. So we, as viewers, alongside William, can tell that she's not particularly thrilled with William presenting Ben's uniform to her. And William clarifies that he went on his own and brought it back for Trevor after Amaranthus insists she didn't ask him to do this for her. We can see her touching the uniform with this sort of hesitation. And again, I think it's great visual foreshadowing for a much larger plot that we aren't privy to yet. And she brings it to put it with the rest of Ben's belongings, and she's visibly uncomfortable by this. And that's when William spots the figurine that he had gifted Ben at the top of episode 2 in the drawer. I do love that we get this overhead shot of all the other things that Ben claimed as his belongings, because it gives insight into him being a real fully fleshed out person. And when William asks to see the figurine, Amaranthus explains that Ben had gave it to her before he left for the raid so that she'd be able to give it to Trevor. This is the only thing so far that has made William pause and rethink his theory that Ben is alive. And we can see that Amaranthus is trying to move away from this subject matter, so she quickly takes the figurine back, closes the drawer, and invites William outside on a walk. That's where we get these beautiful shots of beetles, so again foreshadowing to their conversation, and finches, which again get brought up in this line of dialogue that Amaranthus delivers from the book. And she explains that her father taught her that finches learn songs from its parents. So if you take an egg from one nest and put it in another one some miles away, the nestling will learn the songs of the new parents instead of the one who laid the egg. William tells her that her waistcoat was a huge hit at the luncheon, and they start to have the conversation about all of the different beetles found on the waistcoat. And that's when we can see her using it as an excuse to, again, cross a line and a boundary and touch William with her hands on his chest. This is when she points out the Eastern Hercules beetle, and it's a reflection again from the top of the episode. And it's significant, even though the dialogue here is slightly different, with William saying Titius, the ruler, whereas in the book he says Tithian, the rebel. Amaranthus then draws a comparison between the beetle and William, and how he does not intend to live his life to please other people's expectations. This up-close shot of the embroidery is just so beautiful. I really hope that they put this outfit on display somewhere after the show wraps, because I was so glad they gave it its due on the show, and we actually got to see an up-close version of all of this beautiful embroidery. And William in the book and in the show is shocked by how direct Amaranthus is, but he notes that she's always this direct. And in the book, he asks her what she means of expectations. By this point in the book, Amaranthus has already offered to give William an heir to his title so that he wouldn't have to renounce it. And she's proposed that William marry her, and once she gives him a son, he can leave her as a dowager countess of whatever estate he calls home. And there's a lot of back and forth about it. Instead, the show has them kiss here, and we skip that part until a later episode. So again, they're really trying to push the fact that there is a love story brewing between the two of them in the show, and that Amaranthus is a little bit more calculated than I think people understand at face value. Back at the Ridge, Claire successfully delivers the first baby, which is a boy, and realizes that the other baby is upside down. After they have Susanna push, the baby is born, but it's unmoving, we don't hear crying, and we learn that it's a girl. And Claire knows something is wrong, and that's when we see her carry the baby to the table by the window and start to perform CPR to try and revive her. And Jamie is watching all of this from the doorway, and he can tell that the baby is gone, but Claire is unwilling to give up on this child. And we see her start to get really emotional. And that's when we get a lot of context from the books that I wasn't sure that the show was going to dive into regarding the blue light healing power that Claire has. As she's holding this baby in her arms, it reminds her very deeply of holding faith. And we get these flashbacks from season 2 of Claire in Paris, both audibly with the dialogue overlay and then visually with the raven and the blue light. And we see the shot of Claire holding Faith and singing the song to her from season 2. And that's when, in the present moment, we get this up-close shot of Claire's hand and the veins running through her hand. And the camera work here is an interesting way to convey this magic because we almost see her veins vibrating in her hand and then also in her neck. Master Raymond's voiceover talks about Claire's aura and how hers is blue. And in the book, he also mentions Jamie's aura being red, and he tells Claire to call out for him while the two of them try and save her life. So they haven't yet touched upon Jamie's red aura, and they don't have Jamie holding Claire's shoulder like he is in the book while she breathes new life into this baby. But we're able to then hear the baby cry for the first time, and Claire is in shock and confused. She doesn't understand what she did, so she hands the baby to Jamie to give to Susanna. And in the book, Claire has Jamie's hand on her shoulder, like I said, for strength, and as she comes into her full powers, she leans on him to revive the baby. So again, the show is having her be able to do this without him touching her. And no one in the room can understand how she was able to accomplish this. Jamie as well. We can tell that Jamie has a lot of thoughts about what is happening to Claire because he has recognized in her a face that she makes often, that he registers as her knowing she's unable to do anything else. And again, this close-up that we get of Claire's face is a great way of conveying that she doesn't understand what happened herself. The decision then to cut to this shot of the moon is really clever because it's not only a visual callback, but it's also a narrative one to the prophecy that Claire learns about herself in season 4 and how she will come into her full power when her hair is fully white. Part of that prophecy includes a raven swallowing the moon. In the show, they have Jamie confront Claire about what happened, and he explains it doesn't make sense that she was able to do what she did. And he asks her to give him an explanation, even if it doesn't make complete sense to her. And in the book, while she was healing the baby, she had thought about Roger telling her about Dr. McEwen and how he had healed Buck. And then she also thought about Malva Christie's baby boy and how she was unable to save him, but she had felt a blue spark in her hands that dwindled and then died. And so she explains to Jamie the lore around Master Raymond and everything that she felt in Paris. Claire starts explaining how she felt in Paris after Faith was born and then died, and how Claire was so ill and was dying herself. And she admits that at one point she wanted to die. And Jamie's face here is just so heartbreaking because I don't think he's ever heard her say words like that before. Master Raymond had come and put his hands on her, and she felt within her a light, pale blue light that spread all through her bones, and it felt as though he had burned the infection out of her. And that is what she tells Jamie she felt again, stronger, from her own fingers going into the body of that baby, and then she was able to feel the heartbeat again. That's when Jamie tells Claire again that she is a brilliant healer and that he's witnessed it himself multiple times, but he's resigned to tell her that he didn't see anything blue. He watched her try and save that baby. He knew she was thinking of Faith, and so was he. And his facial expression in this scene is really poignant to me. And Claire's too, because she can tell that what she felt was real, but it's so beyond the possibility of reality that even to her, she's kind of resolved to the idea that she's making it up or that something's tricking her. Claire then brings up Master Raymond and how perhaps that was how he was able to bring Faith back to life. So again, we're getting the possibility of Faith being alive again in the show. And Jamie questions why he wouldn't have returned their daughter to them if he was able to revive her. Claire points out that he was on the run. He might not have been able to, even if he wanted to. and she starts unwrapping her hair and asks Jamie what color her hair is. He tells her the beautiful line of all the colors of the earth before he approaches her. And when she turns, we can see that she has more white in her hair now than she did before. Jamie tells her it's the color of moonlight all around her face. The visual and narrative callback to the prophecy that Claire learns about in season 4 and how her hair will be fully white when she comes into her full power is another item from the books that I wasn't sure we were going to get in the show, but I am glad that they're including it because I feel like the show has largely veered away from a lot of the magic that Claire herself is involved in the original source material. And so to have that be reintroduced in this final season helps me to wrap my head around how they might conclude Jamie's ghost storyline, because introducing more of this magic is a really great way to use the magic as a way to explain his ghost. And it will be very important in this King's Mountain storyline that we've been teasing for the first 3 episodes of season 8, because Claire having these powers is going to be pivotal for that scene in particular. Then we see Jamie bring Fanny out to a cairn that he has made for her to come visit whenever she wants to speak with Jane. And this scene was really, really sweet between the two of them. Jamie tells Fanny that he wishes he'd known Jane and that she would have been welcome to live with them on the ridge as well. And he encourages Fanny to talk to her more often and come to this place and put a stone on the cairn every time she speaks with her. And we see Fanny tell Jane she loves her so much and misses her deeply. And Jamie tells her that this is her and Jane's home. And they share this really beautiful hug between one another that was really, really sentimental and sweet. Fanny in the story is struggling with her grief, and I think that it's going to continue to be an important narrative thread throughout this season, and using her as a way to dig up more information about the Faith storyline makes sense to me narratively as well. And while they are hugging, they hear a gunshot ring out, and Jamie tells Fanny to stay put as he goes to investigate. And that's when he finds Cleveland alongside a wagon, and the 2 men that we had seen earlier in the episode were found smuggling guns onto Jamie's property. Cleveland calls out Jamie for not realizing what's happening right under his nose and tells Jamie to step aside, and that's when Fanny appears. She tells Jamie who the men are, and that's when Cleveland almost serves as kind of a proxy for the audience to point out to Jamie that things are happening because he's being so passive. He can be angry about the situation all he wants, but he's not actively doing anything about it, and that negligence is now showing up in real time on his property. And so Cleveland leaves with the guns, yes, but Jamie first starts to search their bodies for more information. And that's when he finds a letter inside the boot of one of the men. He's able to find what he was looking for, which is something to tie Cunningham to the greater mystery of what's going on right under Jamie's nose. And Cunningham is naturally curious, but Jamie warns him, "Get off my property, leave this business to me." We can watch Fanny observing all of this in real time, and we know she's a very observant young girl. And so again, all of this will come up later on, and she's not being shielded from a lot of the realities of the Ridge because she's around first and foremost to witness it, but she's also a lot smarter than I think people give her credit for. So Cunningham leaves but says, "I'm taking the guns," and Jamie immediately heads to the trading post. He walks right past Crombie into Crombie's trading post and shuts the door on him. And that's when we see him lock the door and confront Cunningham head on. To me, this is one of the best scenes of the season so far because Jamie and him are toe-to-toe. I think these actors are really great opposite one another, and the characters are super compelling against one another too, because Cunningham is such a snake of a person, and the actor sells it so well. Jamie tells him that the 2 men that had visited him are dead and shows Cunningham the letter that is presumably from Cunningham's uncle. And Jamie knows he has no kin, so that's the first crack in the facade that Cunningham has built while on the Ridge. In that letter, the uncle Eldon starts talking about Abies fraseri, a subspecies of balsam fir, and Jamie plays dumb until he tells Cunningham that he knows the letter isn't about trees and arms. This scene reminded me a lot of the raid scene and the first time that Jamie actually meets Lord John Grey. I felt like his line delivery, the way he crowds Cunningham over the desk, all of that seemed very much in line with his behavior when he was younger and he performed that raid. We can also tell just from the acting choices here that Cunningham knows Jamie's a lot smarter than he first presented. And he's starting to piece together this plot quite quickly, which is when we see him glance over to the wall and look at the barrel of the gun that we saw him holding earlier on in the episode. So again, that's a visual callback to earlier on in this particular episode. And Cunningham looks at it at the same time. And the acting, again, is just so perfect because I do not believe for a second that Cunningham is actually worried about being discovered here. But Jamie doesn't know that. And so he takes the weapon down and finds the code and cipher, if you will, to read the letter. Cunningham then gets up from behind his desk and walks around so that he's in front of Jamie, who's moved over to this other table to read the letter with the cipher. And as he sits down in this chair, we can see him exhale and close his eyes, and he's very much resolved to the fact that Jamie has figured out what's going on. We see the cipher over the letter, and Jamie reads out loud, "Provide update on Fraser's Ridge, additional arms coming soon. Progress is slow in Rowan County, in need of new recruits." And we see Cunningham hunch over, almost like he's in disbelief, but he's acting. The actor is acting like someone who is acting, if that makes sense. And he says to Jamie very casually that it's very impressive, Mr. Fraser. And you are right, that letter is not about trees. I assume it is from my commander, Major Patrick Ferguson. And that's when Jamie realizes that Cunningham is still working for the British, and he is in charge of turning loyal Southerners into a loyalist militia. Jamie is obviously furious as Cunningham so openly admits that he's been raising a militia right under Jamie's nose, and that he has been gone for a long time. So he's missed all of this happening on his land. And it's clear in this scene that Cunningham is not worried about Jamie being a serious threat to him or his plans at all. And he makes the argument that more people on his land are willing to switch sides than Jamie has realized, but also that Jamie and him are probably more aligned politically than Jamie would like to admit to. Jamie says, "Speak plainly, sir, for I do not understand." And Cunningham, again, moves very strategically. It's like they're playing chess in the scene with how they move around each other. He moves beside the door and then tells Jamie that he would be better to protect his land and the people on it by aligning with Cunningham and the British than fighting against them. If they can quicken the end of this war by letting the British win, then Jamie and all the people on the ridge are going to be able to keep the land that had been gifted to him and maintain the life that they had been leading. And that's only possible if the British win. The smug look on Cunningham's face is so perfect because it tees up everything we need to know about the ensuing battle, both literally and metaphorically, between these two men, and how Cunningham is really going to go toe-to-toe with him quite easily. He's not intimidated by Jamie in the least. And as we watch Jamie leave the trading post with this new information, we get another one of Frank's voiceovers. And he rides back to the big house with Frank's voice telling him, "I told you, Fraser, it's coming. The pieces are falling into place just as I wrote. Each day brings you closer to Kings Mountain and closer to your history." The last line in particular is fascinating to me because even though Frank is writing this from the future, at the time that Jamie is having this thought, it's his future, not his history, that they're talking about. So the line of, "It's bringing you closer to Kings Mountain and closer to your history," I find really fascinating. And again, it's such an interesting play on words that gets you thinking about the time loop that Jamie and Claire exist within. when one of them dies, does it all just restart and they find each other again? That's a theory that a lot of people who read the books and watch the show have contemplated. So I do hope that all of this ties into Jamie's ghost in some way and that we wrap it up in a satisfying way in the show version.